Hello, everyone. I am so excited to be here today. When I was asked to give a presentation to parents, I of course said yes because I know how hard these days can be having to teach your own children, care for them. Some of us are working from home and just juggling all the things that come with being a parent during these times. So, really, one thing that I wanted to focus on was how do we support our children's mental health? We're barely keeping ourselves together, but how do we work to help our children keep it together, especially mentally? So I'm going to share my screen. I have a little presentation for everyone today on how do we support our children's mental health and really how do we navigate the changes that are coming with COVID and all of the academic requirements that are now being expected to be completed at home. So give me just a second so I can go ahead and share that today. Let me see if I am doing this. Okay, here we go. All right, so supporting our child's mental health. Okay, as you can see in the background of my home office, I have a few toys. So that lets you know that I too am not just a mental health provider juggling the demands of having to do therapy virtually these days, but I'm also a parent and I'm also having to navigate homeschooling and the changes that come with everything that's been going on with COVID-19. So I have made it a mission to really reach out to parents and people in the community to help them understand that with change comes opportunity. This is our opportunity to show our children that we can be resilient in the face of change and adversity, that when some obstacle comes into our life, it's okay to be upset and saddened and troubled by it, but then we find solutions and we find ways to navigate the problem. So that's how I'm choosing to approach the situation these days, and I hope that my presentation can help you do the same for your children. Let's see if I can. Okay, so a little bit about me. One of the things that I pride myself on is all the training that I've involved myself in so that I can be the professional that people need me to be. When I seek services, I want the best of the best, and I'm definitely not the best of the best, but I work really hard to know what's current and what's available and what's evidence-based and what does the research say these days. So I actually have 2 master's degrees. One is in clinical psychology, which focuses more on testing and evaluation of mental health disorders. And the other is in community counseling, where we focus on the treatment of mental health disorders, not just in children, but families, adults, and couples. I'm also certified in a type of therapy called dialectical behavioral therapy, and this is also known as DBT. And it's basically to help people, including children and adolescents, cope with the demands of stress. Sometimes we can't always change the environment, but we can learn to just tolerate the stress that comes with the changes of today. And that's what DBT really focuses on, is how do we tolerate distress. Some of the populations that I focus on and I work with in practice is definitely children with PTSD, children who have endured traumas, multiple traumas, the juvenile population. I spent a year training under the psychologist at the Juvenile Justice Center here in Bexar County. I also provide psychological and mental health evaluations for children needing diagnoses, kind of where they might be referred out by their teachers or their school and parents are seeking answers. That's where I would come in to try to understand what's really going on. Also trained in parent facilitation when parents need help co-parenting, when we have like a divorce or separation situation and they can't come to agreement about how to navigate the co-parenting situation. They would come in and we would kind of talk about some rules that we can agree on and establish as a team. I've done home studies for adoptions and custody cases. So that's where I would go into the home and I would interview the families and I would interview the child and I would evaluate to see if the home is adequate enough and kind of help the judge make decisions in terms of where's the child going to live and all of that. And so I have dedicated most of my career to working in the world of child, adolescent, and family treatment, whether it's just environmental stressors, mental health disorders, or even family changing dynamics. So I wanted to share that before we go into the presentation so that you kind of know a little bit about my background and about, where my information is coming from. All right. And I think Irma was basically saying we're going to save our questions for the end. So if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat. And then at the end, we can revisit them and we'll go through whatever I can answer. Okay. So today we're really going to focus on learning the warning signs that your child may be having some mental health issues or in general suffering. Not all problems that children face are mental health disorders, but they're still under the umbrella of like a mental health problem, right? So kids can be having difficulty adjusting to change. They can be having stressful situations, and they may not be having a mental health disorder. They may not be diagnosable, or they may not even need anything like medication, but we still are saying that there's something different going on, and we want to learn what the signs are, or even symptoms if things are getting a little or are escalating a little more than what's normative for your child's developmental age. We also are going to learn tips on how to respond. So let's say after today's presentation, you kind of take a look at your situation and your child and your family system, and you say, okay, I think we have something going on here. We're going to talk about different ways that you can respond to the situation as a parent. And then finally, at the end of the day, we're modeling how to live life for our children. So I think one of the most important things that as parents we need to do is learn how to manage our own mental health. Because if we're not coping well and we're undergoing a lot of mental health issues, and we think that it's not going to impact our children, well, we're wrong. So we really do have to prioritize our own mental health so that we can inadvertently show our children how to cope with change, how to manage difficult situations in life, because they're watching us and we're essentially teaching them, even if it's not always direct. Okay. So with kids, it's so difficult because we never know if they're just seeking some kind of attention, or if they're just like being defiant because they don't want to do something, or if it's actually a sign that they're struggling with something a little bit more severe, like a mental illness. So one of the things we always want to look out for is isolating behaviors. So what does that mean? Isolating behaviors would mean like being away in their room for long periods of time, not really wanting to engage with the family or even with their friends, not really wanting to go and do things that normally would make them happy, like go outside and play basketball or attend their regular sporting events, or even just come out into the living room and have pizza with the family, like things that were normally things they enjoyed, but they tend to want to be alone more often, and maybe even a little irritable when you try to kind of like pull them out of their isolation behaviors or isolating behaviors. Those are things that we really want to look out for. And I can tell you right now that it's so hard to tell, especially if you have teenagers. So teenagers, are exerting their independence. They're in that developmental age where they want to be independent, they want a sense of autonomy, so they want to have their own space. But that's not the same thing as isolating from the world to avoid, number one, this is why children isolate when they're having like depression or mental health symptoms. They don't want anyone to notice that they're feeling bad. Okay. Or number two, they don't want to have to work really hard to keep it together, which is a lot of energy when you don't have a lot of coping skills at their age. So they isolate so they don't have to work hard to keep it together, and also so that people don't notice and then eventually point it out, because these days there's a lot of shame around having things like depression or anxiety or even suicidal ideation. Okay. Other things to look out for, especially with kids, is their change in behavior. All of a sudden they're stealing, or maybe they're engaging in maladaptive behaviors like drinking or using drugs if you're dealing with, adolescents or even pre-adolescents. Hoarding food, like all of a sudden they're hiding food under their bed and it stinks or it's rotting, or these are all kind of essentially like cries for help, right? These are all things that if we were to sit down our kids and we were to ask them, like, didn't you know that if you stole that you were going to get in trouble? Or didn't you think that if you kept 6 packets of bologna under your bed that it was going to rot and it was going to stink and I was going to find it? These are things that they know are going to lead to consequences, but they engage in them, and theoretically it's subconsciously, meaning they're not thinking about it right away, but it's a way to cry out for help. And so we need to be seeing these changes in behaviors that often make us really upset as parents as warning signs that maybe our children need some kind of support that they're not able to communicate directly. Okay. Another thing that might be going on is their sensitivity or desensitivity. So we can notice, like, if there's a child who's normally pretty resilient, or you can joke with them, or you can have normal conversations with the family or just with friends, but then all of a sudden they become extra sensitive. Anything makes them really upset, or anything makes them want to cry, or anything makes them lash out at you. And so it's important to know that that might be a warning sign that if they can't tolerate a lot of, like, joking or things in the environment, that they might be working really hard inside to keep themselves together, that's a sign to you as a parent that the overly sensitive responses that you're getting, like, why are you being so sensitive, or why are you being so emotional, it might be a sign that they're struggling with something they're not telling you about. Okay. Desensitization is the opposite. I saw that a lot in the juvenile justice population. So that's when kids go to the opposite end of the spectrum and they start having that, like, I don't care attitude. That's that, I don't care, whatever, it doesn't matter. And they start to really embody and act like nothing in the world matters. And that can be sometimes typical of teenagers, but not to the point where absolutely nothing matters. Okay. Because then we start getting into a danger zone where they don't even care if something happens to them. They're starting to make decisions that they don't care if somebody gets hurt. They don't care if they get hurt. They are completely desensitized. Now they don't have any sensitivity to anything. And we really need to watch out for them as well, because we don't want them getting into situations where there could be a terrible accident, or eventually them not caring so much that they end up hurting themselves. Okay. And so that led me to self-injurious behaviors. A lot of times parents don't know how or what to think about self-injurious behaviors, because we automatically want to think, like, why would anybody want to just hurt themselves? Are they trying to kill themselves? And usually the answer is no. Self-injury and suicidal ideation are actually two different things. So self-injury is when a child engages in behaviors that are going to be harmful to their person. That could be anything from cutting themselves to scratching themselves to hitting themselves. For boys, it's a little more discreet. It's usually like punching walls when they're mad, and you'll see their knuckles like swollen or even broken sometimes, or even engaging in activities where they're like almost like trying to get hurt. Like, I've had a lot of football players where they'll be like, I don't care, I just go head first, and if I get hurt, oh well, and then they end up getting hurt. Or skateboarders that just kind of like jump off the building knowing that they're kind of going to get hurt, but almost intentionally doing it. So self-injurious behaviors are ways to harm themselves, but the intention is not to kill themselves. And usually there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, we could probably do a whole presentation on that, but the underlying theme for self-injurious behaviors is really to say, like, I am having trouble coping with everything going on the inside, that I would rather just have to deal with something that's going on the outside. The pain on the outside from this cut or this scratch is easier to deal with than the pain I feel on the inside. So it's like a psychological distraction, if you will. Now, suicidal ideation is very different, okay? Suicidal ideation is a lot more intense and should be taken very seriously. I never believe that when a child has an idea, even just a thought about wanting to die, that it's just nothing. Okay, the last thing we want to do is think that suicidal ideation is not a big deal, because it really, really is. At the very least, it's a sign that your child is suffering something pretty severe, pretty intense, and we want to get them some support. At the most, they're at a point, and we'll go over like how to assess, how to evaluate your child's suicidal ideation, but they're at a point where they feel like everything that they've tried isn't enough. So for them to get to that point, we really have to intervene. We really have to like step up as parents and say, no, like, you haven't tried everything. Let's figure it out. Because if your brain is getting you to the point where it's saying the only way to solve this problem is to die, then something's not okay. Okay. And then finally, running away. Before I had any training in the juvenile justice system or with adolescent behaviors and things like that, sometimes running away can seem like just a defiant thing for many parents. Like, oh, like, you don't want to listen, or you just want to do whatever you want. But running away is sometimes a manifestation of what they wish they could do emotionally, meaning they wish they could get away from their problems that they're suffering on the inside, but you can't do that. So then they end up running away physically, and they usually go engage in behaviors, we're back to this, where it's not healthy. It's a way to distract, it's a way to cope with what they're going through, but they run away because their mind is in that fight or flight mode, where they don't know how to cope with the stressor in the environment or their inside of themselves. So they end up trying to run away from the problem by physically running away. So there should be some point of concern if there's a child that you know, or even your child is like a repeated runaway. There should be some heavy concern about what's going on, with that child. All right. So let's just say we look at our child or our children, and we're like, oh my God, like, I think my child may be going through something. I never realized those were the things that meant something may be going on psychologically. So what do we do? What do we do as parents? How do we respond? Okay, so I put it very simple, kind of like the do's and don'ts. And I made it this way because I feel like we have so much to know as parents. We're expected to know how to be teachers. We're expected to know how to be counselors. We're expected to know how to be nurses. We're expected to know how to do everything. The last thing we need to know is like this long list of how to respond to your child if they're going through something difficult psychologically. So I made it super simple. I believe in the KISS approach. Keep it short and sweet, so that we can remember, so that in a time of crisis, we know we can engage and we know exactly what to do. So the first side is the do's. This is what we want to do. Okay, this is how we want to respond if you feel that your child is suffering some kind of mental health issue, or just struggling mentally, not even having to deal with disorders or none of that, that you just see them struggling emotionally. This is what we want to do. Number one, we want to check in and listen actively. Okay, I really emphasize the word actively, because listening is one thing. Like, we can sit there, we can even strap ourselves to a chair, and we can listen to what our child says. But if you're not listening actively, and I'll explain what that means, then the child may not feel validated. Okay, so Active listening means that you are engaging and really trying to understand what your child is experiencing. You're not trying to give advice. You're not trying to interrupt them and say, well, the only way you feel that way is because of this. Like, you're not trying to change their story for them with the way you see things. As a parent, you're listening actively, meaning you're just there to make sure, as they're telling you what's going on, that you're following along. The way that I like to do that is I'll request for, I'll make sure that I'm understanding by asking if I'm understanding correctly. So I'll say, okay, let me make sure I got you right. We don't want to get too serious. We always want to maintain our calm and our cool as parents. So I'll say, okay, let me make sure I'm just getting you right. So you're saying that for the last few months, you've just been in your room and you've just been thinking about not wanting to be alive anymore. Is that what you're saying? Because they may not say it directly. So when you're listening actively, you're trying to interpret what they're saying by making sure you're following along as they're telling you the story of what's happening to them. If you think you understood and you didn't listen actively, when you start engaging in your parent communication, in your teaching, and your support, you may be missing the mark. So we want to make sure that if you're listening, that you're clarifying and you're making sure that you're understanding them correctly. Okay. The second thing we want to do is we want to reflect the changes that you've noticed. Okay. So when parents, let's just use the behavior of isolating in the room. That's a very popular one. I always joke and I say that the black hoodie is like the teenager's universal depressed uniform. So isolation is kind of hand in hand with that, where they don't want to be seen, they don't want to be bothered, they don't want you to notice that they're struggling, so they like hide away. But instead of saying something like, why are you always in your room? Or why don't you get out and hang out with the family? Or, instead of confronting them with some hostility or some frustration, it's coming from a place of love, right? Because we don't want them to be isolated. We know that's not healthy. But instead of confronting them or kind of saying it in a more direct way, we want to reflect to make it less threatening. So a reflection would sound something like, I've noticed that you've been in your room a lot, and before it was okay for you to come out and eat pizza and watch movies with us, but now you just really don't want to do anything and you don't even want to go out with your friends. Is what's that about? And they might say like, oh, I don't know, I just want to be alone. Or they might say, yeah, I don't know, I've just been feeling really sad lately. Or they might say, no, I've just been working on a project and here it is, I invented, I don't know, a wireless something or whatever, we don't know. But when we reflect, I've noticed that this is happening, I've noticed that this is going on with you. It's less confrontational, and we open up the door for our children to confirm that what we're noticing is true. And most importantly, when we reflect and we notice, like I've noticed, then they start to feel like, oh, like mom really does listen or dad really does listen to what I'm not saying. Okay? So children will try to communicate with us non-verbally all the time. Well, I did a presentation a few years ago to parents who were adopting foster kids, and they were trying to learn like the best type of parenting skills for foster children. And one of the things that I presented on for a whole 2 hours was the nonverbal communication that is the primary language for children. Children don't have the vocabulary to say, Mom, I think I'm depressed. I have the clinical symptoms of depression according to the DSM-5. They will slam the door. They will yell at you. They will isolate themselves. They will start stealing money from your purse. They're going to try to tell you that something's wrong without having to tell you 80% of the time. Okay. Finally, at the end of the day, as much as we try and as much as we love our children, sometimes we need to know that certain things require professional help. And we are not expected to be everything and to do it all. So do not feel like a failure or like you have messed something up or you did something wrong. Seeking professional help is the most responsible and loving thing you can do as a parent, because when you know that something's out of your world, when you know that something's beyond what you can do as a parent, you are putting your child's needs first over your own, and you are saying, I know what I can't do, and so we need support from a professional. Okay, so it's not a bad thing. All right. So, what we don't want to do, we don't want to push our kids away when they're struggling psychologically. We want to open the door of communication. So, we definitely don't want to criticize, right? We don't want to threaten. Criticism would be something like, why are you always so sensitive when I say something to you, God? Or, if you don't come out of your room, then I'm going to take that door off of you, or whatever. And instead of reflecting or being empathetic as to why they are engaging in these behaviors, if we go to criticism or threats, then we're pushing them away and they're not going to feel safe to tell us what's really going on. And then that's a danger zone. Okay. Another thing we do not want to do is we don't want to minimize. We do live in a society where some things are blown out of proportion. And so sometimes it's hard for us to tell when something is serious or when something is just a normal childhood behavior, right? And so it's important not to minimize, especially like I was saying earlier with the suicidal ideation. We don't want to minimize children's difficulties. For them, it's a big deal. I'll never forget one time I was in session with a little girl. I think she was maybe like 8. And she was having a lot of emotional difficulty. She was experiencing a lot of sensitivity. So her mom, was like, I don't know what to do. Everything I say or do, she cries and she gets upset. So we're here. We just need your help. So then I said, tell me what's going on, I asked her. And she said, well, it's just the other day my mom took away my doll and I just got really upset and I screamed and I started to cry. So then I said, well, why was the doll so important to you? And she said, well, to me, I'm a little girl, and it's the only way that I know how to feel better is to have my doll. And even though, and this is a little 8-year-old girl, and even though it's not a big deal to adults, it's a big deal to me. And so that kind of like opened up my eyes as we grow older and we go into adulthood, we forget the importance of small things like play and flexibility and getting to choose and comfort objects, right? So we need to remember that it may not be a big deal for us, but it is a big deal for them. So we don't want to minimize their experience. And we definitely don't want to shame, right? So as parents, we mean the best, and sometimes we don't really realize we're doing it, but we might inadvertently, accidentally be shaming our kids. Like, I don't know why, you got sad over that. Like, so many other kids have it worse, right? And so we'll kind of like shame them for feeling what they do. And that's actually very harmful, because then the child starts to feel like, well, maybe something's wrong with me. Why am I feeling this way? And then they start to second guess themselves, and then we start getting into, now we're affecting their self-worth. Okay. I wanted to share some statistics just because I know that there's a lot of information around, but I always go to the horse's mouth. So NAMI, the National Alliance of Mental Illness, is really where all the statistics that are valid exist. The NAMI is in every single city. They offer free mental health resources for everyone throughout the country. And they have really good researchers that provide us with pretty fairly accurate statistics. So what their website is currently saying is that 13% of children from ages 8 to 15 experience some kind of mental health condition. So that's 13%. 50% of children 8 to 15 experience a mental health condition but don't receive treatment. Okay. And then 17% of high school students, this is a big one, seriously consider suicide. So I thought that was like a huge number. 17% of the high schoolers are having those thoughts. And then, of course, half of all lifetime cases of mental illness begin at age 14. So it's very rare that, at age 27 or 28, that a child, an adult who didn't have any symptoms before was completely free of symptoms. And so we want to know that there are signs that are going to be coming up. If your child if you have a history of mental illness, or your family has a history of mental illness, really start to look at, is my child exhibiting some of those symptoms around age 12, 13, 14 is really when they start to pop up, the symptoms. Okay, and here's just another, based on disorders throughout the US, 4.2 million kids are diagnosed with ADHD. 1.8 million kids are diagnosed with anxiety. And remember, that's because the previous statistics said half of the kids who actually have disorders don't get help. They don't even get seen. 1 million have an alcohol use disorder. So these are kind of like the numbers, with the awareness that not every child gets evaluated and diagnosed or treated. Okay. Oops. All right. So suicidal ideation, I definitely did not want to skirt around this topic. I didn't want to just simply, talk about it briefly and not really emphasize on the severity of it. Children and suicidal ideation is very real. I can't tell you time and time again how many times parents have come in with the letter from the school district that says this child has exhibited some kind of suicidal ideation or attempt, and they may not return to school until they get some kind of assessment or evaluation to be cleared to return. And so that the earliest I've seen it is like age 6, all the way up until, like, of course, seniors in high school. So it's very real, and we want to know, like, what are some of the things that cause children to have those kinds of thoughts. And of course, the number one would be like a major loss. Like, I've had a few kids where their parents have passed away, or their parents are divorced, or one of their parents just leaves and never comes back. Substance use in the family, and a lot of times parents will be struggling with their own issues, and they won't realize how their behaviors are impacting their child's mental health. Peer or social pressure, there are little pods that I have come across where one girl or two girls are suicidal, and it's kind of become like their identity, like to go to Clarity or to go in and out of Laurel Ridge or to these mental facilities. And it's kind of become part of who they are. And then they start to slowly impact some of the kids around them. And although, we never want to minimize suicidal ideation, we definitely want to be able to discern. We want to be able to tell, is this a behavior that they're kind of picking up based on some kids around them that have been saying or doing these things? Or is this truly like something that the child is experiencing within themselves? Both can be true at the same time. So they can feel suicidal and then they seek out like-minded friends, and now there's like a whole group of kids that are depressed and they're all friends and they're all having suicidal ideation and they're all valid. Or the other can be true where your child was, fairly okay, and then they kind of made friends with some kids that are suffering from something, and then they picked up on the idea that this is what we do when we're sad. We want to make sure that they don't have access to weapons. Lock up all your weapons. Think of things like guns and, even ropes, ladders, like things like that are pretty scary to think of. But blades, things that, can be used easily. Pills, keep them locked away. Make sure that if they experience some kind of public humiliation, like they fell or something happened at school or something embarrassing occurred to them, for them, social identity is everything. So if there's some kind of humiliation or embarrassment that occurs, we really want to check in with them for a few days. Some children do suffer from chronic pain. And that can be so debilitating even for adults. And so just feeling like I can't do all the things my friends are doing, I'm always in pain, or I always feel bad, I don't have the energy, that can start to play a role in their psychological distress and possibly lead to suicidal ideation. And then just the family history of suicide. Like, there's a lot of research that shows that depression is partly genetic. And so we want to really know, is my child showing symptoms? Let me check in. How do we do that? So when your child is showing symptoms that they're not okay and they may be having suicidal ideations, we want to check for the 3 M's. Do they have the means to do what they want to do? Do they have the motivation to do what they want to do? And do they have a method? This is the scariest one. That's why I put a little asterisk. Do they have a plan to follow through with those ideas about wanting to harm themselves or kill themselves? The means would be like if a child says, I want to shoot myself in the head, do they even have a gun at home? Sometimes they don't, so they don't have the means. Or sometimes they'll say, I feel like I want to die, but I wouldn't actually do it because I don't want my mom or my dad to feel sad. Or, they'll say, I do want to kill myself. I want to shoot myself in the head, and my family would be better off without me. And I'm going to do it on Saturday when my parents go to their date night, and I know exactly what I'm going to do. Okay, when all the 3 M's are checked off, you need to take that very seriously. Call the local crisis facility. Make sure you're informing your school counselor, and it may require hospitalization, which is inpatient if they're serious about wanting to hurt themselves. It may require partial hospitalization where they don't have to stay there, but you'll have to take them for several days until they get stabilized. Or it may require outpatient treatment where they have to see a counselor, 1 or 2 times a week. And then just keep monitoring and securing the home. A lot of times we find out a little bit too late when a child either has already attempted or they're going to attempt. We missed the first couple of M's and we find out. So we want to be proactive as parents and just always be monitoring and securing the home. Just always put your guns away. Just always not have access to ladders and ropes and ligaments, and put your pills away. Move them from place to place, because kids are pretty observant and you think you're sly and you're hiding them, but they'll figure it out. So kind of try to be always adapting the environment to keep it safe. And then for us as parents, like I said early on, we want to model positive mental health. So at the end of the day, we're teaching our kids how to be humans, right? We're teaching them how to be adults, how to be people in the world. And we can preach all day about how to be, about what not to do. But if we're not doing that ourselves, then we're essentially not teaching them. Okay. So the first thing you have to do as a parent is incorporate self-care. That can mean like going for a walk, or that can be like meditation or prayer for yourself. That can be like journaling. It can be just going to your own therapist. Now they're easily accessible through Zoom. It can be whatever it takes for you to keep your cool, for you to be able to be that pillar of communication for your children. Your children should never feel like you're already going through too much, that they can't come to you because you're not okay. I've heard that a lot. A lot of kids end up in frequent outpatient therapy with me because they didn't want to go to their parents because they didn't want to add more to what was an obvious stressful situation. So we should be modeling self-care. We should be setting boundaries. Like, you should be, not letting people treat you a certain way, or being in relationships that are healthy, not letting your kids, be around people that are going to influence them to do bad things. Behavioral activation, like you yourself do things that make you happy. Like, do you play tennis? Do you go to the gym? Do you play an instrument? Do you write poetry? Do you what do you call that, book scrapbooking? Do you take pictures, photography? Or like, what are you doing to model, I live my life in a way that makes me happy? right? So we have to show our kids that we are capable of doing that by actively doing it ourselves, and that's called behavioral activation. Coping skills, like I like to verbalize my coping skills so that my son knows what I'm doing. So if something makes me mad, I'll say, you know, I really want to get mad, but I'm not going to, because I'm going to take my deep breath and I'm just going to stay calm, cool, and collected. So I'm narrating like my coping skill so that he can pick up on it. I'm not just going to do it because he might miss how I'm dealing with the situation. And so focusing on how I'm coping and showing him how I'm doing that is an important part. Seeking professional support for ourselves is so important, and really just leading the way. Like at the end of the day, you don't have to be a professional. You don't have to even have the manual on how to, you know, teach your kids how to deal with their emotional stress. But if we don't know how to deal with our own stress and we seek professional help, or we read books, or we read articles, or we consult and we figure it out, we're showing them that when a problem comes up, you don't just kind of take that victim mentality, you do something to try to move forward in the situation. So I have a few books that I would like to recommend for some of you parents who are into reading. This is a really good one. It's called Raising Can Do Kids, Giving Children the Tools to Thrive in a Fast Changing World. This is a really good one. It tells you about like what age your kid is. Like if your kid's a early childhood, like 3 to 6, what's normal and how to deal with it. And then for teenagers, and then for like young adults, like it takes you all the way through so that you can know, like, is this normal? Is this normally developmental, normative for their developmental age? Or is this something I should be concerned about? The next one is 13 things mentally strong parents don't do. So this is really about focusing on don't do these things because you might be accidentally harming your children. We want to teach them how to be resilient. We want to teach them how to cope. And if we don't really know how to do that besides criticizing or threatening, then this is a really good book for parents who want some strategies on how to navigate stressors with their children. And then finally, this is one of my favorite books. I actually got this book after my son developed a tic from separation anxiety. And I was so desperate. I was like, I've done everything I know how to do. I don't know what else to do. So I found this book called Growing Up Brave. And it's basically strategies that are really fun and creative to help children overcome fears and stress. So for his age, like one of the things that we did was we got some really cool rocks from Hobby Lobby, and we created what's called a bravery stone. And so whenever he would be afraid to go to school or be afraid to go somewhere where I wasn't going to be, he would carry his bravery stone, and it would be a way for him to get through the fear of saying goodbye, and then eventually he would be okay. So that's the kind of stuff that's in this book. Very creative, very fun ways to navigate anxiety and stress and things like that. So thank you guys so much for your time. We're out of time and we'd have just enough time for questions, but this is our information. If you guys feel that, you know, I don't even know where to begin, I need my child to get support, reach out to Miss Irma, your school counselor, the social worker, and then also feel free to reach out to us. We accept all insurances, and we have several locations, and we do virtual family, individual, and even virtual play therapy. So that's it for me today. Thank you so much for your time.